Recording started.
Just leaving that disclaimer there for a moment as we get rolling here. Welcome, everybody, this week to the Matrexit discussion group call. This is going to be part 2 for what we started last week. We are going to be discussing the mystery schools and kind of the Psyop that has happened there in regards to the mystery schools, because they have affected everybody's life in one way or another, whether they realize it or not. Unfortunately, like most things, they go unrecognized. And it's probably because they aren't pointed out. So that's what I want to do this evening, is kind of point it out. And when we started last week talking about where a lot of the knowledge and information comes from that trickles down to people today. And it trickles down to people in many, many different forms. I remember reading something a few years ago. It was regarding a gentleman who was going to be graduating from one of the Ivy League colleges. We know most all the Ivy League colleges, well, not most all of them are Jesuit schools. And they all offer also training and education, say like in seminary, if somebody wants to become a priest, things like that. And at the time, for what I was reading, this was a number of years ago, but they were graduating at that time 30 to 40,000 potential priests per year. And the question this gentleman had, and he posed it to one of the professors, was, gosh, he said, there's not a need or a demand for 30 or 40,000 new priests in the U.S. every year. Because he was specifically looking at the schools for the U.S. And what he was told was, that really wasn't a concern, because they weren't being trained necessarily just to go into the priesthood. That there is many other different levels of things they could do, different facets that could follow, which would be like going in and getting just regular jobs and trying to get on like a school board or become a member of a church board, become a member of the Chamber of Commerce, different things like that that affect society. And that they were to implement their education at those levels. This makes me think also, there's something I haven't mentioned in a long time regarding change agents. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there is such individuals out there referred to as a change agent. I was listening to Rush Limbaugh one time, just to have some like noise in the background, but my ears always perk up, when I hear certain words. And I don't recall what he was discussing, but he was giving his opinion, and he said that this was his opinion as a change agent. And of course, my ears perked up to that. I was like, oh, wow, Rush Limbaugh is admitting to being a change agent, because they have these people placed in different roles, significant roles in society, whether at a higher level, like in broadcasting, like Rush Limbaugh was at, or if they're even at lower levels, such as I mentioned, like being on a church board or a school board or a Chamber of Commerce, or, what other various kind of committees that townships or cities or counties might have. Which also reminds me is just something that was written by Carol Quigley, because he was talking about the future. And he said, in the future, the world would be run by circles within circles or rings within rings, something to that effect. Because he said it didn't matter if one of those circles or rings was taken down, because those people would also be members of many other circles or many other types of rings. And that was something else I just kind of stashed away in the back of my mind, not fully sure what he was referring to. But then when I started studying, for instance, like PMAs or private associations, what I had read by him quickly it came back to mind, and now it made a whole lot more sense to me. And because so many of these things we think of as agencies or associations, organizations, these are all those rings. I was also listening one time to a lady that had gotten a job in a very large company in the Northeast. I'll just say figuratively, imagine it was something like General Electric, something along those lines. Very big company. And she thought that it would be wise for her to also attend some of the open meetings or seminars that some of the other big corporations were doing to kind of see how things were moving, what direction that the economy was moving in at the time, and how people were going to best formulate their companies to accurately target the correct people, make the most amount of money possible, yada, yada, yada. And what she quickly discovered after attending several of these big meetings was that she noticed that some of the same board members for certain companies were also board members for other companies as well. That's another kind of light bulb moment as to what those rings within rings or circles within circles are that Quigley wrote about. So these people all have their hand in all different aspects of society and of commerce, and are going to be able to influence it in the direction that they've been brought up on, the direction they've been educated or propagandized for in their schooling. And at the same time, many of these people as well might even get jobs as educators. They might be in the public schools. I read an article here 2 or 3 years ago. It was kind of somebody that was complaining. They lived like in Washington or Oregon, a smaller area, more of a rural area. And they were complaining because so many people were leaving California, and they were referring to specifically younger educated people that graduated from college, moving from California up into their state and into the rural communities and getting jobs at their schools, and that they were bringing along the indoctrination that they had picked up in California along with them, and that was trickling down to the students. And their offspring were coming home from school with a very different set of questions and ideas than they had had prior in life. And so there is a way of seeing how these influences are played in. I mean, that they're sprinkled. Think of, sowing seeds. That's exactly what's being done. And that's the best way for anybody to get any like grassroots movement or something like that off the ground. You got to start sowing seeds. You have to start doing it at the local level is best. And the people that are educated with those ideas and start living their life formulated around some of those plans are going to start influencing others as well as they get older and as they start taking some of these positions. A lot of people expect different things, say, for instance, like New World Order or One World Government. A lot of people think this is going to happen overnight. Like one day they're going to click on the TV and there's going to be somebody there sitting on a throne, proclaiming to be the head of the new world church, when they don't realize that these things are really done over time and incrementally, step by step, so that you really don't notice it until you wake up to the day where it has already happened. and it didn't happen all at once. It snuck in on you, and that's the scariest thing. I mentioned something to a longtime friend of mine earlier today that they were showing a verse in the Bible, and they were picking out the verse that really meant something to them, but it had the word Lord in it. And if you look at a Bible, the word Lord will be in all caps, but they'll use a smaller font for the O-R-D. It's still a capitalization font, but it's just a smaller font, so it looks like it's lowercase, like the words around it, with an uppercase L. When realistically, all four letters are all uppercase. Don't people stop and wonder why they would do that? Why that deception would be there like that? And that's much, I said, like, the small print that you see in contracts. That's how they sneak a deception in on people. And it's often right there in front of your face, but to your conscious mind, it goes unnoticed. Although very often your subconscious, you'll have maybe a little bit of cognitive dissonance set in. Your subconscious knows something's wrong, something's not quite right. And then as well, there's going to be big things that can occur that will bring in undue influences or influences that are not necessarily not so positive. I spoke last week about Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and the experiment that they were doing in the desert with Babylon Working. They were trying to bring forward what they called the Scarlet Woman, or the Woman of Babylon, and they wanted to manifest that into the world. There's no report, and they were doing this, of course, it was done through sex magic, but there's really no report around that time of a birth. I believe Cameron was the name of the lady. There's no report of her having a child immediately around that time, and she did give birth to a daughter a couple years later. But I'm also not so sure that if something did occur, if it necessarily would be medically reported. It could have been done wisely as a home birth or something like that, as a lot of people are opting to do today, which to me is a very smart choice. But what occurred then in the late 1940s really was not anything new. This is something that had also been worked on, coincidentally, 365 years earlier. In 1582, John Dee and Edward Kelly met each other. Edward Kelly was also kind of an alchemist, and you could say snake oil salesman. He had evidently done some things that were not on the up and up. Anybody can go online, look up pictures for Edward Kelly, and Kelly is spelled with an EY. Look up pictures of him, and he's always wearing a hat. And sometimes he's even wearing what looks like it may be like a winter, like skull cap that's kind of pulled down. And the reason why, and he always had long hair, and the purposes behind, the hat and the long hair, was that they had cropped the top of his ears, both ears off, which was a sign of somebody who was like a snake oil salesman or somebody who is defrauding people. So he kind of kept that hidden, although he acted as a scryer for John Dee, much like the case with Jack Parsons for L. Ron Hubbard. And at the same time, John Dee and Edward Kelly, they were also playing with sex magic. This was the same thing as L. Ron Hubbard was doing. They were using aspects of Thelema, which most people would know comes from Aleister Crowley. That was his kind of genre of magic, if you want to call it, that he was looking into. The Thelemic Society, this is another one of these mystery schools. And I think there's more people following these things than they realize. And at the same time, a lot of the aspects and beliefs and teachings from those mystery schools, like I had mentioned with teachers, get bred into society little by little without people even realizing it. I know some time ago, I was looking at information regarding like the scarlet thread or the crimson thread mentioned in the Bible. And that's something that goes back to Zoroastrianism, which is a predecessor really to what people may think of as Christianity today, or even Judaism, a lot of the religions. This started, reports are maybe 2,000 years BC, long before people started finding out things about like the Abrahamic Code, um, which was an offshoot from Zoroastrianism. But these things slowly get bred into societies without people realizing it. I remember when I was looking at the Scarlet Thread, I went back to the old story for it. And the old story in the scripture regarded two twins. One was where the word Pharisee comes from, what was his name. And the other child, I'm trying to recall the name, it had the same name as one of the early birth control pills, which I found really fascinating. It's like, gosh, you're going to dig way back at that time to find a name for something related to birth control from an event that had to do with a birth. And we know anytime scripturally when you're looking at twins, there's always one trying to steal the birthright from the other one. Everybody wants to steal that firstborn birthright and capture it for themselves. That's a topic I'm not going to go into. I think that if the creator does see that as something valid, then the birthright's going to go where it's supposed to go anyway, regardless of point. And so many of these have been bred in to little by little into society through a lot of different people. And one of the people that isn't really known that well would be Rudolf Steiner. And if people have studied anything about, say, anthroposophy and the movement like with Helen Blavatsky and these people, then well, they'll know the name Rudolf Steiner. But unfortunately, I think the majority of people are not aware of that name. And his teachings were also, just like Christianity, just like Judaism, just like these other religions, a lot of those teachings also came out of Zoroastrianism. And who was this god of Zoroastrianism? Let me see if I can pull up a photo here, and if it wants to do it for me. And I will show you a depiction that Rudolf Steiner made of this god of Zoroastrianism. And I think you should be able to see it there. Get my mug out of the way. He's definitely a cute guy there. That would be Ahriman. And Ahriman was kind of a counterpart. He was looked at as maybe a counterpart to the great deceiver, to Satan, the devil, whatever people want to call him, Lucifer. You know, all depending. You have to kind of judge on where those names actually came from. But he was looked at as either a counterpart or maybe even possibly being one and the same. It's really all in who you talk to. Different people will argue different points regarding Ahriman and who he was. So, you know, the opinions are really going to vary depending on who you talk to. I don't necessarily know that there's necessarily any definite right or wrong when it comes to Ahriman or who he was supposed to have been. But it is part of this whole dualistic world that we live in. Even under natural law, you've got water runs downhill. That's natural law. The apple falling, you know, that was not part of the big discovery for gravity or anything like that. No, that was natural law. That's just what happens. There's no changing it. And natural law in and of itself really is neither good nor bad. Uh, there's good things that occur from it, but there's also bad things that occur from it. Like many people know, I just went through a hurricane down here not long ago. That was a result of natural law. A lot of people say in theosophy or anthropology are going to want to say that that has to deal a lot with the mindset of the people and the collective mindset of the people that's in the ether or in the Akashic record, whatever you want to call it. Personally, I'm not so sure that that's the case. I'm not so sure that the mindset of the whole necessarily affects major storms like that from occurring. Although I have seen situations where the collective can influence other, maybe more moderate weather, such as rain, areas that have been in drought for a long time, where a collective of people will come together and somehow or another, amazingly, within a day or so of them doing this, it will start raining. So there can be an influence there. I'm just not so sure as how drastic this is. But with Rudolf Steiner, I think if some people think, gosh, that name sounds familiar, one of the reasons why would probably be because of some of the schools that are out there, such as the Waldorf school, or maybe the Spence schools. The Waldorf school, often if you go to look it up, it's also referred to as the Steiner Waldorf school. And what they're doing is just trying to find a new approach as to teaching students and helping people learn. And I'm not saying it's bad. There's some great aspects to it too. But in the same way, some of these incorrect aspects are going to get leaked in, and it's going to become part of our foundation, part of the core belief system that people are going to have. And these are also found in many other types of places as well, and not just some of these schools, but it's going to be found in a lot of different programs that are out there. I spoke last week about self-help programs and stated that, I was going to give you an example of a few of those that you may readily recognize these names or may have checked out or gone to a meeting or two for some of these. Now, all of these use aspects of things that were taught from the Essenes, from the mystery schools of that time. I mentioned last week there was a group, the Bathers, that were out there. There is also another group of people who were very strict about looking at scripture that didn't follow the path of everybody else, and they followed that school of thought. There's numerous schools at that time, and so many of them did sprout today that we see sprouted from that era and from the region around Egypt. When I talk about Zoroastrianism, that was something that sprouted out of Persia many, many years ago, thousands of years ago. And Persia today, as you would think of it, Persia would be Iran. And I find it very interesting that that area has always been a central hub of activity around Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, the whole Middle Eastern area. In fact, Afghanistan is referred to as the graveyard of nations, because so many people have gone in there and tried to take it over for whatever reason and have been booted out. I mean, right? It's called the graveyard of nations. They weren't successful. And the last one to leave there, I guess willingly, was the United States pulled out of there. I would kind of be curious to know what the influences really were for them to pull out, other than what you may see on the news, some of the surface level purposes or political reasons. Maybe there was some other things behind it. And you go back and see different stories, for instance, talking about like the Kandahar giant, uh, 14, 15-foot red-headed giant that was supposedly captured there. But there's many other stories of giants. And the way a lot of those people live there is designed a certain way, away from being able to avoid some of these creatures. I think there's a whole lot out there in that region that has been brought to the brought to the light of the public or to the general public, because it would change our viewpoint of how the world operates. It would make huge changes. And that's one of the last things that the powers that shouldn't be at the top that's one of the things they want to avoid, because they want to be the supreme authority. If people realize that there is other authority here that is more supreme to them, then they might lose some of their footing. It's just like Paul had written, saying that, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Well, everybody today, everything is about flesh and blood, right? It's about, we've got this enemy here, we've got that enemy over there. Everything's against flesh and blood. But he even said, no, it is not about flesh and blood. What you're fighting is principalities and powers, spiritual principalities and powers in high places. When he's saying high places, he wasn't meaning at the seat of government. And if you go into the Greek, one of the words that was used there actually translates to authorities. So knowing that there are actual spiritual authorities here and not just physical authorities would change the way people operate. And there's so many of these like little programs that I mentioned last week that they sprinkle in some good self-help ideas and things like that, but they don't really give you the meat. They don't give you the power of what's needed to be able to fight and defend yourself against these spiritual authorities, which I have to reiterate. These authorities are stronger than the physical, just like Paul said. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities and powers in high places. That should really make people stop and think. And these different groups, these different ideas that have become offshoots from these mystery schools, from this psyop, are going to give you maybe just enough to feel better about yourself, maybe to better your life a little bit along the way. But they're not really going to give you enough to really have the power that you need to have, which is going to do what? It's going to keep you coming back to class. It's going to keep you continuing to make the donations. It's going to keep you putting your energy into whatever program that they're trying to grow and actually prosper themselves. It's really all for them to self-prosper, not for you to self-prosper, even though that illusion is what's put out there. Some of these programs that we're going to see along the way, and you'll see these, you'll read them maybe on social media, you'll see ads, things like that. They could be called heartfelt programs. And a lot of people would know, for instance, like A Course in Miracles or Thrive, The Path, yoga. Yoga at its core showed some of these spiritual teachings. It wasn't just all about on how to breathe and doing breathing exercises and stretching exercises. That's what most people think yoga is today, but that wasn't the full teachings of yoga. That was just the physical. They're not giving you the spiritual. It reminds me of a chef I heard talking a long time ago, and he said, every good chef, any excellent chef, all have one thing in common. He said, yes, they'll give out their recipes, but they'll leave out a key ingredient to the recipes. And so people will go and make the recipe and they'll be like, gosh, man, it tastes a lot like what I got at the restaurant, but it's just not quite exactly it. They can't put their finger on it. And that's because they've left out like a key ingredient. I'll give you one right now. If you're looking, for instance, at like a poultry dish, uh, say even like a soup, a chicken soup or a turkey soup, anything dealing with poultry. But one of the key ingredients that you're not going to see in these recipes that the chefs leave out, as odd as this may sound, is nutmeg. Because you don't want enough in there to where you taste the nutmeg, but you put enough in there just to where it gives you a little bit more of an earthy taste, and it kind of melds more of the flavors together. Try out a small pinch of nutmeg next time you make a chicken soup. Even if it's out of the can, they left that ingredient out. So add it to it. See if you notice the difference. But yeah, that key elements will always be left out to keep you coming back and keep you from really attaining that power that you're after. Because if you attained that power that you're after, guess what? You're not going to be coming back to class again, are you? You might go occasionally just to be around other like minded people, but you will have seen through the fact that they left out a key ingredient for you. And so you may not necessarily enjoy going back and participating in some of these programs again. Other programs like this, now, if you go way back, yeah, people first heard about this during the time of the Beatles. It would be transcendental meditation, is another one. Now, the transcendental meditation deals a lot with the spiritual, deals with the mind, but what is it doing? It's leaving out a physical ingredient as well. You've got some that focus on the physical, you've got some that focus purely on the mental and maybe a little bit spiritual, but they don't really combine them all together. I would suggest, for instance, if somebody wants to really look into doing some of these things on your own, I mean, have a good idea on the correct methods, some of those things as a staple, as a foundation, but try blending a couple of these together. For instance, blend together transcendental meditation and yoga. See what happens. I think you're going to be amazed. You're also going to see things talked about like Dharma. That might be something that's centered around a movement, or guided meditation. Guided meditations are a big one. Myself, I'd be a little apprehensive with a guided meditation unless you have very full confidence as to who this guide is. You want to make sure that you're entering into a dimension that you want to enter into. Uh, Probably one of the most popular ones that you're going to hear talked about is people talk about children of the light or Mother Gaia. Gaia is a big one, or higher minds. But if you hear some of these, and they may not be specifically said exactly like higher minds, for instance, but it might be a slight variation of that. Now, in so many of these, you have to look and see what they are offering. Are they offering mostly mental? Are they offering mostly spiritual? Are they offering physical, just physical, like maybe yoga would? Or are they going and combining all three together? Because you have to have all three combined together before you're going to start on the ground level getting anywhere. Mind, body, and spirit. Mind, body, and spirit have to be joined, and they have to be of equal eye. you can't be purely right-brained. You can't be purely left-brained. That you have to find a balance, and you have to find a balance between all three of these before you're really going to get anywhere. And I'm not going to call it ascension. I think that is just a ridiculous term, ascension. I had somebody ask me if I've raised my vibration. I think that's another ridiculous one. If I've raised my vibration, I think you could probably take a tuning fork or a meter or whatever and hold it next to a yogi, and then hold it next to an old man sitting in a bar or something, and you're not going to get a different reading from each of those individuals. You know, at the core, if there is a vibration, that's going to happen uh, in your core, in the heart of your mind. I explore people to check that out. Look up that little phrase, the heart of your mind. But if there's going to be a change anywhere, vibration wise or otherwise, that's where it's going to be at. It's going to be deep in the inner core. It's not something physical. Unfortunately, everybody looks at everything as being physical. That means they're just living strictly like in a 2D or 3D world. You're not going to see the 4, 5, 6, 7D if you're looking at everything strictly as two-dimensional. Unfortunately, most people do. A lot of these, maybe better known organizations that are out there that use the aspects of maybe some of the teachings, if you want to look at it as maybe the carnal or spiritual teachings or righteous teachings, things like that, would be like saying, your Thelema or your Golden Dawn. People have heard of the Rosicrucians, the Great White Brotherhood. Great White Brotherhood, that goes way back prior to the, I think they were called like the Guided Masters or the Ascended Masters, what they were called. And that was the beginning of the Great White Brotherhood. And when I say Great White Brotherhood, it has nothing to do with race. Once again, that's people living in this, three-dimensional world. It's way deeper than that. It has nothing to do with color. You're going to see this as well in groups like Jesuits, for instance, or say Knights of Malta or Knights Templar or Knights of Columbus. The Knights of anything, all right? It should be kind of a red flag to people that there's something more major going on here. And when you tune your ears to being able to pay attention for these aspects, you'll start noticing it in different things, like in the news. I remember when Donald Trump was going to first run for president, there was a statement made by Judge Napolitano. He was kind of a golden boy of the right or the conservatives or whatever. And Judge Napolitano, he does bring forward some good info, but you also have to listen, not just what people say, but what they don't say. What areas do they not go into? Because, just like law, you've got to be able to read things forward and backwards and realize that maybe what's only being alluded to or not said is equally as important as to what is being said. But Judge Napolitano made the statement regarding Donald Trump that he could never become president because he was not initiated. It's like, oh, wait a minute. What do you mean? You're saying that because, he wasn't, say, for instance, maybe a member of the Masons or the Knights of Malta or one of these other organizations, that there's no way he could get in. Because in the past, that's how everybody's gotten in. But these people stick together. They help each other. And they're going to side with each other. If they see somebody that is kind of a Joe Six-Pack out there that is running against one of their, air quotes, brothers, they're going to go for their brother every single time. And that's why Judge Napolitano said that. But what else was the judge saying when he made that statement? How did he know that Trump was not one of the initiated? Evidently, Napolitano is. And so he must have some other knowledge behind the scenes there that he's not necessarily coming out with, but he did allude to it. How else would he know that about Trump? Except that he himself is one of the initiated. And I'd be kind of curious to see which one of the groups he belongs to. But you're going to hear little hints like that in a lot of different areas. I think it's totally important for people to pay attention to be able to see how and who is going to be sneaking in some of these core beliefs of some of these different old mystery schools, and try and find out who it is that they actually follow. What school of thought? You've heard that term, the school of thought. What do you think people are referring to when they say school of thought? Go deeper. Don't. I try not to stay on the surface level of things. You have to look deeper into all of these issues. I think it's interesting when you look, for instance, at like the self-help things or some of those programs, and they're dealing with, for instance, everything is relationship. Everything is, whether it's relationship with a mate, whether it's relationship with coworkers, whether it's relationship with your boss at work, whether it's your relationship with dirty old Uncle Sam. Everything is about relationships. But when they get down to, and all these relationships are all obviously going to operate at different levels. They all cannot be treated the same. We know you're not going to treat your boss at work like you do your wife or husband at home, or like you treat your children at home. Everything has to be separated out and know how to deal with it at different levels. I think one of the worst words that is used today is the word love. If you go back to scripture, even, you'll read that you are to love your brother as yourself. Well, I find that's kind of curious. If I am supposed to love my brother as I love myself, then where is a set of scripture that is telling you how you are to love yourself? How you're supposed to think about yourself, how you're supposed to respect yourself. It's kind of giving you a hint there, but it's not giving you the full solution. Once again, leaving out a big ingredient. And very often, this word love is used in ways that people have no idea how it's being used because they don't know what the word love even really means. You think of the word love and you might associate it with you love chocolate ice cream, or you love your husband or wife, you love your mom and dad. But people haven't really been trained and educated into those aspects because there's multiple types of love. And I'll just stay on this one word for a bit, because this can be best seen in all the other different aspects of things that come through from these mystery schools. Because this word love was a big word in the Greek language. And these mystery schools, so many of them sprout from the Greek. So much of Christianity, whether people realize it or not, sprouts from the Greek. So let's just take a look at that word love from the Greek. The Greek used it multiple ways. And this could also be found in the seven mirrors of the Essenes. There is eros love. There's philia love. And I might be butchering some of these words. Don't speak Greek, sorry. Ludus love. Agape love. Pragma love. Phlantia love. A lot of those words really might sound foreign. I know it's Greek. It might sound foreign to a lot of people, but they shouldn't. These should be words that everybody knows and they comprehend the aspect of each of those types of love, because those dictate how you are handling various relationships in your life. Too many parents, for instance, try to treat their offspring. I mean, a lot of people are told, oh, You got to treat your children as if they're an adult. Relate to them as if they're an adult. Don't talk down to them and things like that. Well, there's a degree of truth there, but there's a big falsehood there too, because your love and how you treat that child shouldn't be the way that you treat other adults around you. And it should be very, very different. Yeah, I'll run through those briefly, those types of love, and I recommend people do some research on it, look into it. Your Eros love, Eros, that's your erotic. That's where the word erotic comes from, or your sexual type of love. Your philia love, that would be more of a friendship type of love. A lot of us have seen this word unknowingly, but this is where the root of the word Philadelphia comes from. What's Philadelphia called? The city of brotherly love. And that's what that type of love is. It's a friendship or a brotherly love. There's a ludus love, Ludus. That type of love is more of a playful love, um, maybe a casual love. Uh, it may be the way you relate to somebody that's like an acquaintance. You kind of know them, but you know, you still keep a level of care as to the things you say to them, or as to um, whether you shake your hand or whether you hug them, for instance. There's the agape love, Agape. Agape love is an unconditional love. It's the love that a parent should have. It's a love that we also should, but most people don't, have for their parents. It goes both ways. But an agape love is unconditional love. I may not like what you do. I might be very upset or frustrated by what you do, but it's not going to change the love that I have for you. I may not love your actions, but I still love you just as strong regardless. It's an unconditional love. There's the pragma love, which is it's more of a long-standing relationship type of love. I think of the word maybe pragmatic in a way. That's something that makes sense, and it's you're going to deal with a certain entity, so whether it's a government structure or an employer or something like that, and with a pragma love kind of way. And it's an enduring, I stand behind you kind of thing. But there's a degree of exercise or care that's put into it. And then there's the type of love that I think people see the most of today, promoted today, whether it's an advertisement or television. It's the Philautia love. It's spelled Pilautia, and that is a self-love. It's a conceit. It's vanity. It's narcissism. We see a lot of this in people today. And somehow that type of love that the mystery schools know full well about has been instilled. It has been instilled in people. People have been initiated with growing up to make sure that that ego stays strong. Make sure that you are offended at the drop of a hat. And in fact, not only that, you're actually looking for ways that people are trying to offend you because you've got this strong ego and this love of self that's so strong it must be protected. And too many people operate their life today with that really being their steering wheel, and with that controlling how they deal with their relationships, even with just people they meet casually. They're always making sure to defend that self narcissistic, conceitful love that they have within themselves, which to me really lays at the core of the great work. You have to know how to break down these types of love and how to utilize them correctly, and which ones, whether or not, should be the steering wheel of your life. But these ideas, these emotions, and these mindsets slip into us, whether we even realize it or not. I would say 99.9% of the time, people don't even realize it. It's given to us in small doses all through our life and becomes part of us without even realizing it. The first 8 years or so, 12 years of your life, you're getting a lot of these things put into it. They become kind of the wrinkles of your personality. And then you spend the next, say, 8 years to the age 18 or 20 ironing in those wrinkles and making them a permanent part of who you are. There's the old saying of, give me a child until he is 6, and I will give you the man. What do you think that was talking about? What I've just mentioned to you is exactly what it was talking about. Let me let me create those wrinkles in the personality of the child, and then I will show you who the individual is afterwards. So we need to do the great work. I say it's the hardest thing, is being able to recognize those wrinkles that have been ironed into our mindset and have become part of our personality. And we have to know what those are in order to be able to deal with them. I had mentioned the Waldorf school from Rudolf Steiner that is followed by so many. And like I said, also referred to as the Steiner school. But I think, this is a little bit like the yellow VW theory, that you never see one until you own one. But once you own a yellow VW, you start seeing them everywhere. So I'm going to kind of put something into your mindset, kind of like that yellow VW. And now over the next few weeks, if you haven't already, you're going to start seeing these things. And that is some of these schools, because they're all around us, whether people realize it or not. We may see the name, not even know what it is, but now you're going to know. I'm just going to give you a small handful of them. There's one that is going to stand alone, I believe, and it's one Donald Trump went to. He went to the Q school. Not QUE, it's just spelled Q, school. That's where he went. And these schools may cost $10, $15, $20,000 a year, whatever, for children to go to. Some of them, people get scholarships. People, for instance, within churches will pay for students that they may never even know and may never even know them to be able to go to the school. I mean, just blindly donate. That's where a lot of people today end up going to these schools, if it's not something that is what their family is about or involved with. And a lot of these schools would be named like the Hibernian School, uh, the St. Paul School, Canterbury School. One of my favorite names is the Horace Mann School. I think a lot of us would know who Horace is. And then there's the Spence schools. And of course, people have seen Montessori schools, and like I mentioned, also the Waldorf schools. And these all exist around us, and these schools do a lot of great things. They are teaching or showing another way to educate people, which is greatly needed, absolutely greatly needed. The Prussian system of education that the public school system uses today was probably the worst aspect of Prussia. And what the U.S. do, they grabbed it up and used it as their model for schooling. Craziness. But we need to pay attention to these things that are around us and start seeing the growth of different things like this around us and see the influence that they're having. And where are these people coming from? I mean, how many people really ask somebody, where'd you go to middle school at? They may ask where you went to college at or what university you went to. They might sometimes ask what high school. They're never going to ask what middle school. I think these are questions that should always be asked. And they're questions that I ask people that I just meet on a casual basis because it gives me a good idea as to who they are and what kind of info I might pull from them. And I'm not doing it in a secretive way or whatever. If they say they went to a Montessori school, I'll be like, wow, that's awesome. I haven't talked to very many people that went to a Montessori school. But what do you see different about it as compared to friends that you have that went to public school? And I'll make very candid to them as to the info that I'm looking for. And I think these are good things for us to know to comprehend the fabric of the society that we're involved with. And it's going to help you navigate the waters much easier. One of the things that I find interesting as well with, say, the mystery schools, and I'm not saying you're going to see this in, their, say, Canterbury or Montessori grade school. I'm not saying you're going to see it there, but with the mystery schools themselves, that's so interesting that plays into the various forms of religion today. That really shows how all of these religions all have in common is that they all center around three main elements. And we think of like the natural elements, that um, air, water, earth, wind, fire, that kind of thing. But they all center around three other elements, which always seem to be water, oil, blood, and the term sacrifice. They all use those same words interchangeably in different ways. And at the same time, they're leaving out ingredients for you. The church, whatever church you go to, it's leaving out ingredients for you. It might be focused specifically in one direction of spirituality, but is it doing anything to help you deal with, say, for instance, like the mind and the way you think, or how you think, or why you think what you think? Is it doing anything to help you physically? Do they do very much to, maybe show you aspects of yoga that are usable, or why it's important to stay limber, or why it's important to eat right, and what things to eat and what things not to eat? I know that's definitely not taught to people. You look in grocery carts today and see what people are taking home. People are most definitely not taught what not to eat because those are the things they gravitate to. I think so many of these aspects of life are so obvious and so much right in our face. It goes back to that old saying, we don't see the forest for the trees. It's just too obvious for us to see it. There's a saying that the best place to hide something is in plain sight. That nudity is the best disguise. Gosh, how true is that? And at the same time, they say if you want to hide something, put it in a book. And that's the reason why I recommend people crack a book. I recommended several books to somebody a while ago, and he told me, he says, I've read everything there is to read. I know everything there is to know. I don't need to read anything else. And that individual did nothing but show me their ignorance right there. Because the more people learn, the more you discover how little you really know and how much more there really is to learn. And we need to take the steps to be able to move forward and to learn as much as we possibly can. That's why I say we need to learn who we really are, where we're really from, and where we're really at. Because that's going to unlock the door for you to so much. What did Christ say to the Pharisees and Sadducees? He said, you hold the key and you prevent other people from entering, and yet you don't even enter yourself. That's the facts of what we're dealing with today. We're going to be dealing, whether we realize it or not, mostly with spiritual authorities. They have more influence over this world, over your nation, over your state, over your city than you realize, over your household more than you realize. And if you can't learn how to handle them and have power over them, you're not going to have a whole lot of power in this world. And this world is nothing but a proving ground for the next realm that you're going to go into. So, how much authority do you think you're going to have in the next realm if you can't prove it in this realm? See you all next week. Thanks for being here, guys. And keep your eye out. You know, let these things be like little hints for you. And you're going to start seeing it in your community. You're going to start seeing these things around you. These things that were always there. You maybe always wondered about, but we're not quite sure what it was. Have an awesome week.